Hello, everyone. My name is Hailey Hart-Thompson. I am a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences in the College of Communications, and my wonderful mentor was Dr. Joanna Davidson. And my piece today is titled Narratives from Pockmarked Places, Interwoven Notions of Home and Future among Palestinian and Lebanese Residents in Beirut, Lebanon. And so to start us off, I'm actually going to play a clip from one of the amazing researchers that I worked with, who's actually in this Zoom call today, Seema, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what she says in this clip further.
I remember that I also had my GRE on a Monday. I remember I was like, shoot, I have this revolution is erupting this weekend. Which is I gotta go take my GRE. Yeah, exactly. My GRE is Monday, and I was like, I need to what do I do? This is my nation, but that's my future, which is kind of this overarching identity crisis. Anyway.
So as we can see here, Seema is talking about two different possibilities for future, one in which she takes the GREs and possibly leaves Lebanon, and one in which she continues to be very active in the revolution in Lebanon. And spoiler alert, the GREs were canceled and Seema participated in the revolution in Lebanon. And so I'm going to continue to talk a lot about the idea of thinking about two different futures simultaneously at the same time and verbalizing that as well. And so first, I want to discuss a little bit about the recent history of displacement and conflict in Lebanon. And so a brief history, just since 1948, there was a wave of Palestinians, refugees after the Nakba, which was the displacement of Palestinians after the creation of the State of Israel. And then after Palestinians arrived in Lebanon, there was a Lebanese civil war from 1975 to 1990, which many Palestinians were involved with as well as Lebanese individuals. And then most recently, you have the economic crisis that really increased in 2019. And then following that, one of the many causes of the October uprising, the revolution that Seema mentioned earlier. And then most recently, if many of you saw in the news, there was an explosion of ammonium nitrate in the port of Beirut that's called the Beirut Blast. And so as we can see here, there's a number of different factors that really contribute to conflict and displacement in Lebanon specifically. And so my methodology for this project is I was able to travel to Beirut in January of 2020. And my real question was understanding how Palestinian and Lebanese residents experience contemporary circumstances and how they plan for their future. So I worked with many individuals like Seema and went through about 30 distinct interviews with Palestinians and Lebanese individuals, as well as Syrian individuals that are considered twice displaced. So that's individuals whose ancestors were displaced during the Nakba to Syria, and then during the Arab Spring in Syria were displaced to Lebanon. And so in January 2020, I did a number of in-person interviews, and then obviously due to COVID, I continued most of my research via Instagram, WhatsApp, and Zoom. And so before I kind of dive into the theory around the research that I did, I want to take you all on a quick tour of Beirut. I want to take you around and kind of have a quick conversation about what the space of Beirut actually looks like. And so as you can see here, Lebanon is in the Levant region, and I want to specifically look at Beirut, the capital city. And so more specifically in Beirut, I want to take you all to the coastal area of Beirut, which has been part of a large gentrification project with a joint stock company called Solidaire. And more specifically, I want to look at the Intercontinental Phoenician Hotel. This hotel is very extravagant and used for many diplomats. Many Beirutis can't actually afford it. And so just south of it, you have the old Holiday Inn, which is a relic of the Civil War, Pockmarked. And so these are on the exact same block. If you move south of Beirut, you hit Shatila refugee camp. And this is one of the biggest refugee camps in Lebanon as a whole. There's a lack of resources. As you can see by these pictures, the electricity is really poorly kind of organized, as well as buildings have to be stacked on top of each other because they can expand outward from those white lines that you see in the map there. So this contributes to what I would call liminality. And I more specifically define liminality from Victor Turner's instance of liminality, in which he states that liminality is a state of betwixt and betweenness, where individuals are between a state or status, and they're neither here nor there. And so this is critical to thinking about life in Beirut and ideas about how home and future are impacted. For Palestinians specifically, this liminality is really created from living in Beirut since the Nakba, from that original displacement, with no expected return in sight, and continuing kind of living in that kind of low resource setting. For Lebanese individuals who are often not considered displaced or in a liminal state within their own country, I would argue that they've been living in a state of liminality since the Civil War, with continued government corruption and uncertainty about the possibilities of leading a fulfilling life, and being kind of surrounded by this space that is holding on to ideas of the Civil War, but not really able to fully change it due to the corrupt government. And so I would argue that this is a consideration of protracted liminality, in which the liminality is crossing across many different generations. You have individuals, mainly I spoke with individuals that are second and third generation from the original point of displacement, as I mentioned here. And so this really crosses across many different generations. And so in order to really look at what other scholars had been discussing prior to about how future is being explored by Palestinians, I looked to Ilana Feldman's piece, Reaction, Experimentation, and Refusal. She particularly worked with Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and notes that Palestine is a place that's critical to identity, but doesn't actually shape planning. It's more of a back burner idea. A plan B is kind of a return to Palestine, but it's not actually a possibility. And my interlocutors, both Lebanese and Palestinian, articulated a very different style of planning. So I want to take you particularly to a conversation between Seema, who you met earlier, and Abed, an individual that is of Palestinian descent. And I want to read this paragraph at the bottom here. So he states that they were supposed to go back in a week, so there's no more going back. So we were raised on the idea that there's definitely hope to go back to Palestine. We were going back, even if we get children, we're going back to our land, and we study as much as we can because we can't go back without an education. We have to be educated and knowledgeable. So if we look on the surface, this appears incredibly contradictory. So you have Abed stating that there's no going back, and then a sentence later saying that we're going to go back, even commenting on the actual land of Palestine, the physical movement back to a place. And so I would like to note that this is not at all contradictory. There's a lot more here that we can look at that really shows that he's not stating something that just is contradictory. There's a lot more we can dig into in terms of understanding what Abed is doing in terms of his planning and thinking about future. So in terms of these future notions of homes, I found that individuals talk about and plan for multiple future homes simultaneously. The most quote unquote plausible future doesn't actually take precedence over the other possibilities. So as you can see here, for Lebanese individuals, there's a possibility to stay in Lebanon, and whether that means reinventing the government or being able to change it, or leaving Lebanon. And that's often done simultaneously. For Palestinians, it's to stay in Lebanon, return to Palestine, or leave Lebanon. Again, ignoring plausibility, individuals are all kind of planning for this simultaneously and really being able to think about these futures rather as that quote unquote back burner or plan B future, actually being able to contemplate these futures together at like one moment in time. And so for me, the most important takeaways are really that when you hear something that on the surface seems wildly contradictory, think about how much it actually makes sense, given the context, lives, and historical contingencies that shape, in this case, both Palestinian and Lebanese ideas of past and future. So it's really important to understand that when you discuss these ideas, whether it means imagining a new government and future for Lebanon or imagining a new space that Palestinians can live in, to really validate and understand those futures and really see that where it might seem contradictory to plan for multiple futures, whether one seems more plausible or less plausible, there's a lot more there in understanding what people's ideas of future are. And on a personal level, I'm really thinking a lot about my future and my home as a graduating senior. And I want to take a lot of these ideas of temporality and non-unilineal futures into my own experience and really be able to contemplate multiple futures myself. And lastly, I'd just like to give another thank you to the amazing Dr. Joanna Davidson, who supported me on this project, as well as Seema, who I mentioned multiple times in support of this research, and all of these wonderful individuals that I listed that supported me throughout the entire process of my work. And I'm happy to take questions.